Okay, so we've got to talk about the potential of overpricing your property, right? Even in a busy seller's market. And the first thing you might think is that in a seller's market, I can do whatever I want. Well, clearly there's a tolerance level to that, right? Obviously, as your seller's agent, I would like to get you every dime that your property's worth, every dime that your property's worth. And I think if you and I did everything perfect, and we did everything for staging and people and process and everything appropriately, and we figured out what we think's an appropriate price, and everything's perfect, and we threw it out on the market, and day one buyer walks in the door, they say it's perfect, they write us a full price offer for cash, and they can close in a week. You and I might still feel like we left money on the table, or we could have done something differently or netted you another dollar. I know there's no perfect way to do it. So that being said, there's got to be some tolerance level to how these things work. So here's some things that you might consider over my shoulder when it comes to the dangers of overpricing. So in this scenario, I want to use a property that when I estimate the market value, the market comp value, so that's the comparable value of homes that are like it in the market, right? And there's 6 homes out there, for example, and they're all very similar to this home, and they all sell for about $330,000, $340,000, something like that, right? So my comp value is what I consider to be $335,000, and that's what I tell you as a seller you should expect to receive if you were selling this property on the market today. This is the money that you could actually get for the property before the commission costs and the selling closing costs and things like that. So if that's the comparable market value and it's a busy seller's market, you might be able to pump numbers up quite a bit, right? So if you were to say, for example, in a busy seller's market where, again, the comp value is about $335,000, if you were to price a home at $390,000, for example, you might still have that one buyer who would come along and it's just the perfect house and they've got to have just that exact house, even if it's over whatever the market value is. And again, this isn't a market where you can go look at 5 or 6 houses and they're going to be under contract or pending or whatever, and 1 or 2 that are available, and they're going to be in that comparable value of $335,000. That one buyer might still show up and pay $390,000. So if you do have that one buyer show up on day one and you've marketed your property when it comparably markets at $335,000, if you've marketed at $390,000, he's going to be the only one there, right? So he's not going to feel like he's in much competition. And he's certainly going to know, because he's been watching the market, that you've priced this property at the very peak, if not more than the peak of market value, way over the peak of market value. He just happens to be there because it's the perfect house. Chances are he's not going to show up on day 1. He's going to show up on day 10 because he's been waiting around, right? And he's more than willing to wait a little longer because, again, this price is pretty high. So if in that same market you release that property at $375,000 instead of $390,000, you're going to have more buyers in that market that might be willing to pay up to $375,000, right? You might have a couple buyers that were taking out a loan and they'd like to pay $375,000 up to $375,000 for a home, and so you priced it at that and they're in the market. They wouldn't have seen it at $390,000 because it's out of their budget, right? So they'll be in the market as well on day 1 if you price it at $375,000, right? Does that make sense? So you didn't have those three people standing there at $375,000, and they might see each other's business cards or whatever and notice that each other are looking at the house and they might be willing to compete. One would assume they would have a professional telling them that homes in the area are selling for $335,000, not $375,000. So of course they're probably going to recommend that they make you an offer somewhere of a more reasonable value versus the market, because of course if homes are selling for $335,000 in the area, then that's probably what they're going to appraise for. And if I have to take out a loan at $375,000 but the home only appraises for $335,000, I may not be able to put the deal together at all, right? So if you did price the home at a little bit closer to reasonable value, market value, and again, it's a seller's market, you can push it a little bit. So if you price the home at $350,000 instead, right? Let's try $350,000. And you'll notice that, think about this for a second. If you price the home at $350,000, is the $390,000 guy still gonna look at it? Yeah. And then are the $375,000 guys still going to look at it, or are they going to think it's too cheap at $350,000 and they won't look at it? Of course they'll look at it, right? So then if all of these people are piled up, that's going to be 6 people that are coming in that door day 1, right? 6 people with 30-minute showing times and 30-minute times to take a look at the property, and 6 people that see other people's business cards. And again, you might have those 6 people compete. I'd say you would. And if I was in that competition and I saw that and I thought that my clients, even though I feel the market is $335,000, my clients are willing to pay the extra, and we might make an offer as much as $350,000, but maybe not. chances are, again, we're still going to be considering the market value. So if you were to price that home at market value, and I'm not necessarily suggesting that you do, but if you did price it at the market value, 335 or say 339 or somewhere there close, you're gonna have another, say, 5 people in the market that might be willing to look in that price range. And again, this is a busy market, so that makes sense. So we're adding up here, that's 11 people that are gonna be in the house, right? I don't know if you're familiar with how competition breeds more competition, but one of the things that happens when there's that many people looking at the house is that this guy, the guy that was willing to pay $390, remember, he's still there. He's gonna throw so much money at this place that everybody else runs aware that the sellers don't take anybody else's offer. So this guy might offer as much cash as he's ever willing to offer on this place if you were to price it here and he walked in the door on day one and it's the perfect house and he's competing against 11 people. Does that make sense? Obviously, the numbers go down even further if you were to price it below market value. Say you wanted to stir up competition and see how big of a number you could get and you were comfortable in there. You then have 20 people. Obviously, there's a number that's too low and you wouldn't want to price it too low. Can you imagine how many people would show up to the house if we just priced it at $1 with a minimum reserve? I don't know if you can do that or not, but so of course the dangers of overpricing is that you lose buyers, you lose time, and you lose money. So to point that out again, if you price things at $390, none of these other buyers show up until you start getting things down here where they can actually see them, right? So these people will show up in 2 months or in a month when you bring the price down a little bit because this guy didn't commit. These people will show up when you get the price down a little farther, and then of course after 6 months you got to get it back down to market value, or say markets come up a little bit. Most of these people would have bought and other buyers would be taking their place, but somewhere in that same range, right? So in my opinion, if you price it way too high, you definitely lose the option of these people buying and of course driving that competition together. You lose time because of course if you price it here and this guy does not buy, right? And remember, for what it's worth, if that one guy shows up and he's got no competition, the chances of him paying that $390 are slim to none. Especially if he comes back in a day or two and there's still no competition, and if he feels no competition, or if we check and there's no competition. It's totally different when there's 6 or 7 buyers there standing there on day one or within the first few days. So you don't lose any time if you price things appropriately, and you'll probably, again, I'll repeat, you don't lose any money because if you price it at $339, these folks show up, these folks show up, these folks show up, and these folks show up, and the clients end up paying 5 to 10 grand over the market list value. And of course, that's because they know that it could probably bring 350. And again, the best way to get them in the door to see that is to see everybody there competing at once. So again, this advice isn't the advice that I would give you if it was a strong buyer's market, and that's to say if it was a year on market to get homes sold or whatever, this would be a different conversation. But right now with 60 days on market or whatever or less and not many homes in the market, there's definitely a cap, but you don't want to hit the cap when you list the property. You want to list it appropriately so that we don't overprice and we don't lose buyers and we don't lose time and we don't lose money. Does that make sense?